Okay, so this video I'm just going to talk about the 2025 UCAT and how I personally scored in the 90th percentile, tips for each section and ideal exam technique, and walk you through the exam day and the actual difficulty that I found compared to Medify. Okay, so let's get into it. Okay, so this was my score. Verbal reasoning I got 680, decision making I got 700, quantitative reasoning I got 900, and abstract reasoning is no longer in use, so that's moot. And SJT I got band 2, so that makes it 2280 on the total, which is on the new scale. And just to mention, my Medify averages on the new scale were around about 1900-ish at the start, 1900, 1950, but then I went towards 2150 to 2200 towards the end, especially on some of the easier mocks. Of what I can remember, mock 23 I think was a very easy mock in my opinion. So yeah, my mock scores were around about that much towards the end. So prep tools, I used Medify primarily, but towards my test I did switch to the OQB, which is the own question bank found on the website, which I felt was the most representative of the exam. And then I did my practice test last, so I don't remember the exact dates, but whenever my exam was, like 10 days before I did A, 8 days before I did B, and then like 5 days I did C, and I think 3 days before my exam I did D. And then I left the last 2 days just for like questions and focusing more targeted revision, and didn't really want to do mocks because, you know, like the exam was too close, so I didn't feel it would be useful. But I did use MedEntry as well, but I felt like MedEntry is much easier than Medify. So I would say if you have time, I would say get both because they are slightly different styles. But I would focus on Medify completely if you're only gonna go for one, and it's all you need in my opinion. So yeah, so the first section is verbal reasoning, where you have to do 44 questions in 22 minutes. So this is definitely the toughest section in the UCAT for majority of people. I know some people who do like reading or whatever, they might find it much easier. People do use different techniques. So when I was like, before I gave my exam, there were many people who were like, you either do full reading or scanning for keywords. So what that means is some people, they would read the entire text. So you're given around about 30 seconds per question, right? And there's 4 questions per set, meaning you would have 2 minutes to do 4 questions each set. So what I would just do, what I personally did, is I did scanning for keywords. So whatever the question is, let's say it's asking about some date or whatever, I would just scan the text, find the date, and answer it like that. But what other people would do is that off the 2 minutes you're allowed for each set, you spend 1 minute full reading, and you understand the text. You sort of then understand where certain factors are, where the introduction is, where they talk about certain things which might be in the question, and then you just look at the question and then you just locate it because you already have an understanding of the text. So I think maybe therefore full reading might be more effective because like I'd get 670, so that's not ideal. So maybe full reading might be a better strat, but I only found about this strat very close to the exam. So if you are starting your prep, I would say do full reading. But if you're scoring well in your mocks and you use a different strat, then stick to that. Don't change because it's different for everyone. There's around about 30 seconds for each question. Yeah, I mentioned that. So one of the main skills in VR is to actually know when a passage is genuinely difficult, because of course there are going to be sections which are pages long, like an entire page long, where there's going to be one section which might be a paragraph long. So you need to know when to skip, because if you spend 4 minutes on a much harder passage and you miss and you waste time which could have been easily answered on a much easier passage where you definitely would have got 4 out of 4, that's a loss, and you've lost marks that you don't want to lose there. So you should know when to skip, right? And so there's 2 main types of questions in VR. You've got the true false can't tells, and you've got passage based questions. True false can't tell are considered to be easier than the passage, but some passages can also be easy. I didn't always think true false can't tell are always very easy. I did think some of them are hard, like on Medify. Some of the like more political type questions, they did like seem very weird, but they are considered easier because there's 3 options instead of 4. So I guess, yeah. And I found VR in the actual exam to be slightly easier than Medify, but I did find them very similar. I think the text lengths was similar, maybe a little bit longer in the exam, but maybe the exam questions were a bit more straightforward. Medify sometimes does get a bit too difficult. So that's verbal reasoning. And then we have decision making. This is where you have to do 35 questions, 37 minutes. This is obviously much preferred over VR by most people once again. But in my opinion, I thought it was more difficult than QR, even though there are some aspects of QR which can come in decision making, such as probability. So there's 5 question types. These are just averages, I think, of the new style. Basic syllogisms would be from questions 1 to 6, 1 to 7. Logic puzzles would be from 8 to 12. Usually there's 4 or 5. Arguments would be from 12 to 17. Narrative syllogisms, which are the longer ones, 18 to 23. And then the Venn diagram and probability would be like the last 12, 13, maybe 11 questions. So I actually the first thing I did was I would work from the syllogisms. I'd skip the logic puzzles and then I'd do the rest in order and come back to the logic puzzles. But I felt that every time I would do this, I would have around about 5 minutes left for the logic puzzles. But then I changed my order closer to my exam. So what I did is I would do the basic syllogisms first, and then I would skip everything and go right to the end and then work backwards. But then I would, rather than going the narrative syllogisms first, I would do the arguments, then I would do the syllogisms, then I would do the logic puzzles. It might seem that there's a lot of switching and a lot of changing going on in the middle, but I felt that I had much more time towards the end. Sometimes I would have 8-9 minutes through this method. So I felt this was ideal for me, but again, some people will have better strategies who have higher scores. So, and everyone has different things. At the end of the day, whatever works for you. So some questions are definitely harder than the others. Like obviously narrative syllogisms, people find much harder. Obviously logic puzzles people find hard as compared to other types of questions. So you need to prioritize getting all the basic syllogisms and arguments and Venn diagrams right, because these are usually straightforward. There's data, you can quickly deduce like the correct information from the data and move on, which allows for you to drop marks in other sections. And comparing to Medify once again, Medify tended to give harder logic puzzles, but other than that, I thought overall it was again similar. If not, I think maybe the exam might have been slightly harder. But I think overall, other than that, it was similar. Last section, quantitative reasoning. This is obviously for me, this was the easiest section because I like the maths the most. I do post maths exam walkthroughs and stuff, so I definitely do like maths the most. But the question types aren't always similar like VR or DM. You do get similar patterns, but not like a similar structure. Like DM has an identical structure in every exam with different questions. VR has specific question types. But QR, it's like the patterns are similar. So you find percentage change questions, I think, in almost every mock in Medify. And I don't think I can comment on whether it came on my exam or not, so I won't. But... and then mean, median, mode, again, this is very common as well. And then by cost type questions, I meant like you'd get a lot of these types of questions where they're like data about different ticket prices might be given, and you need to calculate how much like 2 adult tickets and 1 child ticket costs, stuff like that. Now Medify is definitely harder. I think this is known, like among people who do UCAT, it's much harder than reality. My Medify averages were never higher than 700 and 720. To be fair, I did get 800 once in one of the easier mocks, but it was never higher than this, but on average. But definitely Medify is harder. It requires more steps sometimes the questions are very long. You sometimes don't finish everything, but therefore like that does make it very good practice, right? Because if you're getting 700, 720, that means the real exam might be a breeze for you if you can master Medify. So definitely, once again, I prefer Medify over MedEntry based on this, because I felt that, you know, like the questions are harder, so it's preparing you well. Now, knowing your formulas and calculator shortcuts, this is also imperative, and using the numpad, sorry, is very imperative. I didn't use the M plus function. So what the M plus function is, it's like where you can store a number. So because there's, once again, there'd be 4 questions in a set. So let's say it says to calculate something and then you get an answer. And then the next question can ask you to like use your answer in part A. So then what most people would do is they would store it M plus. So that would mean you can store that number into your calculator. So if I have 500, I click M plus, I can reset my calculator, but if I press M plus, it will recall that number. So for larger numbers, M plus is very useful. And then M minus would just remove that number from the storage. So I didn't personally use this, I didn't find the need to, but I do think it is a good technique to save time. SJT, it's obviously lighter than all the other sections as it's not scored, but this one must not be forgotten. Like sometimes people brush over it, they consider, oh, it's easy, and they don't end up practicing it. Many universities, they don't accept band 4, so I think some still do, but I'm not 100% sure. But band 3 is fine, but I do know some also auto-reject for band 3. Manchester definitely rejects for band 3. And there might be a few more, I'm not sure, but and then band 2 and 1 is ideal. I think everyone accepts band 2 and 1. No one really discriminates between band 2 and 1. Obviously 1 might look better, but band 2 and 1, you're calm, you should be good. And my heavy recommendation for SJT is to follow the own question bank. The SJT is definitely most similar to the own question bank. Some of the questions, you can learn the style, they come very similar, like patient confidentiality and like cheat, like scenarios where someone's cheating on an exam. These are very standard scenarios. You'll find all of the stuff on the own question bank, so you should definitely go over that. Now Medify is a much more lenient with the SJT in my opinion. I think I was getting like 99th percentiles as well for SJT. I was getting band 1. I know so many people who got band 1 on Medify but ended up with 3, maybe because they didn't rely on the OQB. I only relied on the OQB towards the latter part of my revision, towards the end. So yeah, so I think maybe focus on the own question bank for SJT. People say read the GMC guidelines. I personally didn't, so I don't know how helpful that is. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but I personally think that SJT from the own question bank practice tests it's good enough because the section genuinely does tend to be repetitive. So just finally talking about my test day and my experience. So my exam was at 2 p.m. and I arrived at 1:15. I thought I should be early just in case there's some traffic or whatever. There was a standard HP keyboard mouse in my test center, no big issues. It was just what I was using at home. They scanned my face, so ensure your ID is taken because you do need ID because they need to make sure like you're not doing misconduct or whatever. I sat the exam, and the main thing that I ensured that I knew my timestamp for each section, so I was following along like, okay, am I like in progress? Because for VR I definitely wasn't that strong, so I needed to know that I wasn't going to end up in a point where I had to maybe like guess what, like 8 questions at the end. So for VR I would say also have a mental check in your brain. Okay, 10 questions, I have 17 minutes left. 21 questions, I have 12 minutes left. You need to have some sort of a timestamp in mind that, okay, I'm following this correctly. At the end I still ran out of VR, I ran out of time, but I sort of like estimated guesses of them. I think what did I do? I like sort of like what's the word, estimated guess. Like I sort of estimated, like I cancelled out 2 options, but I don't know how that would have worked out at the end. And I didn't feel the DM time was too bad, but some of the questions were hard. And then QR I had like 2 minutes left to check over an answer, and in QR I flagged one of the sets and I came back to it at the end and I solved it, and that was fine. And SJT I had 10 minutes. I didn't recheck SJT. I felt personally that if I do SJT in one go, that's probably going to be my best shot. I felt if you recheck, go back and like change, and you might like second guess yourself. Like you go back, if you do in one go, that's like your gut feeling. And with SJT, I was relying on gut feeling for majority of it and the own question bank of what I could remember. So I felt like, let me just do it in one go and then just like hope that I get like a good band. And I ended up with a band 2. And then I left the center and I got my result, which I mentioned previously. So that's the summary of my experience with the UCAT and how I think you can get a 90th percentile score. If there's any questions, feel free to comment, and thanks. Okay, so these are some general tips, my mistakes, and what you should be avoiding. So I think you should definitely have a focus on your nerves. Like for me, verbal reasoning at the start, like the first, I'd say 6-7 questions maybe, they felt very straightforward. Like they weren't anything I hadn't seen before. It was just similar to like passages that I've seen, own question bank, Medify. They didn't seem anything extraordinarily hard, but I think my heart rate was so like high and the pressure was so much at the start that it sort of threw me off. I wasn't really able to like lock in towards the start. I wasn't able to fully focus. at the start, so I think that did really affect like how I began the exam and my entire like feelings in the exam. So if you can, I know it's difficult, it's easier said than done, develop a mental block and cancel out everything in your surroundings. I mean, like if you can do that, that would be ideal, but yeah, it is easier said than done, to be fair. And then I would also say spam mocks. As long as your untimed practice is good, make sure your accuracy is good, because if you're spamming mocks and accuracy is really bad, that's kind of, you're not doing yourself a favor there. So if your untimed practice is good, you're getting towards like 80-90%, then just spam mocks. I personally didn't use timed practice. Maybe it might be beneficial, but I didn't do untimed practice at all. I was ensuring my untimed was good, and I just did mocks. I think mocks was the best reflection. Mini mocks as well. I thought they were good as well. So ensure you're doing minimum 2 mocks a day near your exam. I think that's very ideal. And this is like quite specific, but don't give the exam if you're not ready. Like some people, they might have certain commitments, they might have somewhere to go, or they might have some family stuff going on where they can only give it on a certain date. But if someone, let's say, is booked the exam, like as of today, it's July, Sunday 20th July. Let's say someone's booked the exam 15th August and they can give it later on, but they've just booked it 15th August. I would definitely say if around 10th August, 11th August, you're not getting scores that you want, or you don't feel they're competitive enough, then don't give the exam. If you can, postpone it later on and ensure that you're getting a score that you want. Ensure you're motivated, because if you're getting bad scores, then you're going to be demotivated and you're not going to get the score you want. So if you can, do schedule it at a point where you're getting good scores, and then you can give it whenever you want. And then the final thing I would say is that ensure that you're using the OQB. I did not use this until probably the end of my preparation. It might be one of the most underused thing. Maybe I didn't know about it. Maybe people do use it. But I felt that, especially for DM, I felt it was probably the best source, because Medify and DM, sometimes they have some differences. If you do the question bank, you'll know what I mean. Like sometimes what might be right on Medify might not be right on the OQB. Some definitions, like the word some, the word most, have like different like implications. So definitely incorporate that into your revision, because I think it would be very beneficial. And for VR and QR, I didn't really use the OQB for that too much. Maybe that's also a thing that might be worth it. So yeah, that's a summary of how I found the exam, my mistakes, general tips. If there's any questions, do leave them in the comments and I'll answer them. Thanks.